Hey guys, tonight we travel somewhere brutal. You wake before dawn barely. The sky hasn't even picked a color yet, and already there's that dry, toasted pressure in the air. The kind of heat that doesn't just warm your skin, it waits for you like it's hunting you. The tent walls are soft silhouettes, flickering as the wind shifts, and just outside the desert stretches like an endless ceramic plate, cracking and glowing. You step out barefoot, instantly regret it. The sand still remembers yesterday's sun. By noon, it'll burn through your sandals if you're not careful. And the worst part, there's no escape. No mountain breeze, no forest shade, just you, a few camels, and a terrain that dares you to exist. You probably wouldn't survive this, but the Bedouins, they didn't just survive it, they made it their home. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this little bedtime caravan reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake again, but this time as them. A Bedouin born to heat, to the rhythm of dunes, dust, and silence. And this morning, like every morning, the sun is not your friend. There's no sleeping in. You don't get to snooze. In fact, you barely sleep at all, not in the way city dwellers think of it. The desert never really quiets. Wind whistles like an uninvited guest, and sand sneaks into everything. Your ears, your bedroll, your food, your soul. So you rise early. Not because you're rested, but because dawn is the only time you get to breathe. The sky is merciful for maybe 20 minutes. In that sliver of cool, you tend to your goats. They're already anxious. Animals here know better than to waste time in softness. You check their hooves, their bellies, and you whisper to the young ones. Not because they understand, but because the act of care keeps you human. And then the heat comes. Not gradually, not politely. It descends, like a beast. It's aggressive. The sun climbs fast, and by the time it hits your shoulders, your keffiyeh is already soaked with the salt of survival. The desert heat isn't just hot, it's hostile. It doesn't radiate, it strikes. Metal burns to touch. Water disappears before it ever hits your tongue. And the silence, it's deceptive. Nothing sings after sunrise, not even the birds. So how did they survive this? Let's start with the obvious answer. They respected it. The desert wasn't an enemy, it was a god. You didn't challenge it, you learned its moods. You studied the color of the morning wind, the shimmer of distant rocks, the way ants moved before a sandstorm. Bedouin survival started with observation and humility. The second thing, you kept moving, always, not just physically but mentally. A lazy mind doesn't survive long here. Everything you do, tying ropes, boiling tea, blinking, has to conserve energy. Waste is death. That includes wasted thought. You don't build stone houses. Stone holds heat like a grudge. Instead, you live in the illusion of shelter, the goat hair tent. We'll get to that in upcoming sections. For now, all you have is instinct, timing, and a body trained by generations to work with the sun, not against it. Historians still argue whether Bedouins were primitive or geniuses of minimalism. The answer, as always, depends on what you value, but one thing is clear: they adapted in ways most of us couldn't. They learned to listen to wind. They could smell water from miles away. They knew which star sat above which dune at which hour of which season, not because it was romantic, but because that knowledge meant the difference between drinking tonight or not. And then there's this. The heat never left them. Not really. Even at night when it dips to freezing, you still carry it in your muscles, in your breath, in the way your feet curl under your robe. It haunts you. And yet you learn to rest. Not comfortably, but intentionally. The days are long. Brutally so. You don't get shade. You get slivers. Bits of grace beneath the flap of a tent or behind the humped side of a camel. But even these don't last. By mid-afternoon, the desert is a kiln. Sandstorms can rise from nothing, blistering your face and erasing the tracks you prayed to follow. And you don't complain. Complaining takes energy. Energy takes water. Water takes luck. One quirky survival detail: urine. Not for drinking, despite what survival shows say, but for tracking hydration. The elders teach you, if it's not yellow, you're not drinking enough. If it's dark, prepare for trouble. Not exactly glamorous, but it kept people alive. Another oddity, spitting. You don't, ever, every drop matters, even your spit. So you swallow it, your own discomfort. That too is survival. You laugh only in the mornings, before the sun becomes a dictator. Laughter here is currency, reserved for cool winds and full stomachs. You tell stories, often exaggerated, always poetic, and always with sand in your teeth. And as the day crawls forward, you adjust, not by changing the heat, but by changing yourself. You shift your pace. You shorten your sentences. You breathe through your nose. You squint instinctively. You let the silence be your friend. In the distance, another tent rises. Or maybe it's a mirage. Either way, you walk toward it. Because in this place, even hope is a tool, and that's how you survive. You don't build in the desert, you unbuild. There's no conquering the sand, no hammering permanence into the dunes. The desert laughs at walls and scoffs at roofs. So instead, you live in what looks like a suggestion of a house, a low, dark, impossibly mobile structure stitched from the fur of goats and the logic of survival. It's called a Beit al-Shar, the house of hair. And it's not just a tent. It's a masterclass in environmental engineering, passed down through generations who understood that comfort isn't about resisting nature. It's about cooperating with it just enough to avoid dying. You duck inside the tent and instantly everything changes. The sun loses its grip. Inside, it's maybe 5-10 degrees cooler. Not cold, not even cool, but enough to feel like salvation. The air moves, not because of a fan, obviously, but because of design. The woven goat hair fabric doesn't just flap in the breeze, it breathes. When the air is dry, the fibers swell slightly and close the weave. When humidity rises, or when a sandstorm rolls in, the hair contracts and the fabric opens, letting air flow freely. It's not mechanical, it's biological, organic architecture. And the best part, this miracle of physics sheds rain. Yup, goat hair is oily. When it rains, which is rare but dangerous when it does, the strands swell shut and repel water. You stay dry while the storm thunders past. It's like the tent knows what you need. And it's modular. The tent isn't one piece, it's multiple strips, usually made by the women of the family. They weave the panels on ground looms, singing as they work, and then stitch them together based on how many people are traveling. More mouths, bigger tent. Smaller clan, travel light. It's the IKEA of the ancient world, but tougher. And you don't need trees, nails, or cement. Just rope, poles, muscle, and a head full of tricks. The frame is built from acacia or tamarisk branches, lightweight enough to carry on a camel, strong enough to hold against a windstorm. You drive the pegs deep, always at an angle. You stretch the ropes taut, always adjusting for the day's wind. It's not a structure, it's a dance. Historians still argue whether the Bedouin tent design came from Mesopotamian nomads or emerged independently in the Arabian Peninsula. Either way, the genius of it remains. It's designed for the heat, not just to hide from it, but to manipulate it. The dark color. It absorbs sunlight in the morning to warm the inside after cold desert nights. But by noon, the open sides and vented roof let heat escape upward while pulling in any available breeze from below. Now you poor city child might ask, why black? Wouldn't white reflect more sun? Good question. The answer lies in airflow. Black heats up faster, but it also radiates heat away more efficiently. That temperature difference between inside and outside causes a natural convection current. Translation: the tent self-cools just a bit, just enough. And placement matters. You don't just plop a tent anywhere. You study the wind direction, look for natural shade, even if it's just the shadow of a dune or a huddle of scrub brush. You angle the tent so that prevailing winds can snake through. Sometimes you partially bury one side in sand for insulation. Every choice is deliberate. Every mistake costs water. Inside, the floor is layered with woven rugs. Some purely decorative, some functional, all invaluable. The sand gets everywhere anyway, but the rugs insulate your feet, protect your food, and serve as a place for guests. Hospitality matters out here. Even if you're sweltering, you still offer tea. And oh, the tea. In the heat, it might seem mad to sip boiling liquid, but hot tea makes you sweat. And sweating, controlled sweating, is nature's AC. It cools you as the moisture evaporates. You drink tea not just to hydrate, but to regulate. And besides, it gives you something to do while the sun tries to melt your bones. One of the more fringe ideas, though not entirely baseless, is that the act of sitting quietly in a dark tent, sipping hot tea and speaking slowly, became a cultural adaptation to heat. The rhythm of desert life slows down on purpose. Exertion is the enemy. Stillness is sacred. Outside, the world might be shimmering with heat mirages, dust devils, and that eerie silence that only a baked landscape can hold. But inside, in the half-dark, under the gently shifting roof of goat hair, you're okay. Not thriving, but okay. And in the desert, that's a victory. You stretch out. Not fully, space is precious, but enough to take the pressure off your feet. You wrap your keffiyeh loosely to keep the flies off your face and close your eyes. Not for sleep, just for a pause, because the sun still has hours left in its cruelty. And while you lie there, you think about how the tent isn't just a shelter. It's a symbol, a marker of identity, a reminder that you belong not to a city or a street, but to a lineage of people who cracked the code of the cruelest place on earth and called it home. And somewhere faintly, someone's weaving another panel. One more black banner for the next family. One more home that folds, breathes, and survives. You don't wear clothes in the desert. At least not the way modern folks think of clothes. No snug jeans. No black t-shirts baking your torso alive. No tight sneakers trapping the sweat in your soles. Out here, clothing isn't a fashion statement. It's armor, against the sun, against the sand, against the sheer absurdity of existing where the sky is always trying to kill you. And yet look at you, swathed from head to toe, not in high-tech gear or NASA-designed fabrics, just long, loose layers, white cotton, earth-toned wool, light things fluttering like sails. You're basically dressed like a curtain, and it's brilliant. You might be sweating under it, sure, but here's the thing, sweating is only useful if it evaporates. If you let the sun bake your bare skin, it'll sap moisture faster than your body can produce it. But if you cover yourself properly, head to toe, you actually trap a buffer of cooler air close to your skin. You sweat less, not more. You stay shaded, not suffocated. The Bedouins figured this out a long, long time ago. Your robe, that's a dishdasha or thobe. It's not tight, it flows. Movement is ventilation. And that cloth isn't thick, it breathes. It protects you from the burning sun during the day and insulates you during those shockingly cold desert nights. A perfect dual-purpose shell. And that turban-looking thing on your head, it's a keffiyeh or gutra depending on where you're from. It's not just a cultural marker, it's a toolkit. Folded right, it becomes a face wrap, a sunshade, a dust filter, or a scarf against nighttime chills. You tie it tight in a sandstorm, loose in the breeze, always adaptable, always necessary. Historians still argue whether the style originated purely from necessity or evolved into identity over time. But one thing's clear, fashion here is born from survival. It must be. And that rope-like band that keeps your keffiyeh from flying off, that's an agal. Simple, yes, but lose it and you're chasing fabric across 20 miles of hot nothing. Even your footwear is designed for the terrain. Forget closed boots, they'll cook your feet. You wear simple leather sandals or go barefoot if you've built up the calluses. The goal is to touch the earth as lightly as possible. The sand burns, but it also teaches you how to walk right. Short steps, heel raised, always scanning for shade or stone. You think modern sunscreen is high-tech? Try this. Some Bedouins used a mixture of animal fat and crushed dates as a primitive sunblock. Others rubbed a fine layer of mud or clay on exposed areas. It dried into a crusty, insulating shell. Not pretty, but functional. And in the stranger corners of history, yes, this is real. Some used dried crocodile dung for added protection or ritual purposes, especially in the Nile-adjacent zones. Whether it worked or was symbolic, historians still argue that, but it happened. Then there's the jewelry. You wouldn't think people hauling tents and goats through scorched plains would bother with bangles and silver, but Bedouin accessories weren't just decoration. They served social and practical roles. A silver bracelet wasn't just pretty, it could be melted down, traded, or used as a makeshift tool. Earrings. Sometimes they marked tribe, status, or marital availability. And talismans, tiny charms stitched into children's clothes, protected against jinn, heat stroke, or the evil eye. Belief woven directly into the outfit. One quirky heat trick, wearing 2 layers. Sounds insane, right? But in scorching sun, some Bedouins would wear a very thin undergarment beneath their robe. The inner layer would absorb sweat, and the outer robe would shade it. The evaporating sweat between layers created a cooling effect, nature's own swamp cooler, sewn into your wardrobe. And everything about your dress, the drape, the folds, the length serves a purpose. Fabric hanging over the back of the neck protects that vulnerable spot where sunstroke starts. Loose cuffs. You can dip them in water to cool your wrists and forearms. Long hem keeps your legs shielded without clinging. You learn to move differently in this clothing. Slower, more gracefully. You don't run unless you absolutely have to. You glide, conserving energy. The robes ripple. You start to resemble the landscape itself. Soft, undulating, patient. There's a quiet dignity to it, too. The way the fabric flows. The way everyone looks like a living mirage from a distance. And when the wind picks up and the sand starts to rise and the sky goes from blue to brass, that robe becomes a cocoon. You pull your keffiyeh tight over your face, turn your back to the storm, crouch behind your camel or a dune and wait. The robe flaps, the grit stings, but you endure. Because your clothes weren't made in a lab. They were carved by centuries of practice, trial, and error. They know the desert better than you do. And as the sun hits its cruel zenith and the heat presses down like a curse, you feel the sweat bead, then vanish. The robe stirs gently in the breeze you barely noticed before, and you realize you're still standing. And out here, that's everything. You're thirsty. Not the I forgot my water bottle kind of thirsty. Not even the my mouth's dry variety. This is deep thirst. The kind that grits your tongue, fuzzes your thinking, and makes you eye your own sweat like a wasted blessing. And that's terrifying, because in the desert, thirst isn't just unpleasant, it's lethal. But somehow the Bedouins knew how to find water when there shouldn't be any. No streams, no lakes, not even dew, just sand, wind, rock, and heat. Yet generation after generation they survived. So how? First you listen, not with your ears, with your whole self. Bedouins read the land like it's whispering secrets. You learn to recognize the faint, distant greening of a shrub. You know the way birds fly differently near water, low or tighter arcs. You learn to read ant lines, animal prints, even the color of camel dung. Yes, camel dung. Because if it's moist, something nearby's been drinking. And you dig, slowly, methodically, in the shade of an acacia, at the base of a dune, along ancient wadis, those dry riverbeds that flash flood once every few years. Sometimes water hides just a few feet beneath. Other times you can't find it at all, no matter how badly you need it. Historians still argue whether these desert wells were mapped orally or remembered through more complex means, possibly star charts or passed down poetic mnemonics. Either way, the knowledge was tribal gold. Some secrets were never shared outside the family. If you knew where water lay, you held power. And when you found it, oh, the joy. It wasn't just hydration, it was salvation. You cupped it in your hand like something holy. You didn't gulp, you sipped. Slowly, eyes closed, everything else could wait. But most of the time you didn't get that lucky. So you carried water, in skins, real ones. Goat stomachs sewn and waterproofed with fat or resin, slung over a camel's side. Heavy, stinking, awkward, but life-saving. And still you rationed. Every drop mattered. You knew exactly how much a person could drink and still function. Not thrive, just function. You even learned to rehydrate gradually. Too much too fast could kill you. Heat stroke and hyponatremia were lurking, even before people had names for them. And then there was camel milk. Ah, yes, the desert's backup plan. Rich in fat and hydration, it could sustain a Bedouin for days. Some tribes even used fermented camel milk, Laban, which lasted longer and cooled the body better. It wasn't just food, it was fluid survival. One quirky trick: soaked dates. They wouldn't just provide sugar and calories. When mashed and diluted into a kind of slurry, they could help restore salts lost through sweat. Basically, electrolyte goo before sports drinks were even a glimmer in a lab. And there's this: you sweated smart. The Bedouin lifestyle wasn't about constant movement, it was about packing. You traveled at dawn, rested at noon, and moved again by twilight. You avoided sweating not by staying still, but by knowing exactly when to exert. Even the camels knew. They'd kneel down stubbornly at midday, refusing to budge. And if a camel says it's too hot to walk, you listen. And here's a weird one: water from stones. In some coastal desert zones, Bedouins placed flat stones near plants at night, then returned at dawn to collect tiny amounts of condensation that pooled beneath. A few drops maybe, but out here, that was a treasure. And speaking of weird, there's a fringe historical footnote. Some Bedouin groups were rumored to carry bladders of fish from dried oases, not for eating, but for wringing out the last drops of water left in their sacks. Is it likely? Debatable. Is it possible? In the desert, everything's possible. You never waste water. You never assume more is coming. Even when you have a full skin sloshing beside you, you treat it like it's your last. Because it might be. And yes, urine again. It's a theme. You check its color. You note how often you go. If it's been too long, you don't just drink, you rest, find shade, reassess. The body's like an old friend out here. You have to listen to its complaints before they get loud. But water wasn't just for drinking. It was for ritual. You used it to wash your hands before meals, to clean your feet before prayer. And if there wasn't enough, you used sand instead. Not because it cleaned better, but because it reminded you of humility, of scarcity, of sacredness. There's something about that, the reverence for water. It wasn't just a substance. It was a guest, a divine visitor. You never turned it away, and you never took it for granted. And at night, if you were lucky, you could catch a few precious drops from a canvas funnel under the stars. Not enough to drink, just enough to feel on your face, to remember that water still exists. And tomorrow, if the sun doesn't take you, you'll find more. Maybe. You're hungry, but not in the usual sense. It's not about cravings or boredom or that twitchy, snacky urge you get back home when you're 2 hours into a movie and somehow need chips. No, this is hunger with stakes. Hunger that sharpens your vision, flattens your mood, and makes you think about meat that isn't there. And yet you move, you function, you live. Because out here, in the heart of the desert, food isn't about pleasure. It's about fuel, efficiency. And Bedouins mastered that kind of eating long before modern survivalists ever wrote a blog. You start your day with something humble: dates. Sun-dried, chewy, sweet. You bite into one and it tastes like concentrated sunlight. Packed with sugars, minerals, and slow-burning energy, dates are a gift from the gods, or more accurately, from the few palms tough enough to survive in desert oases. One date, 2, maybe 3, that's your breakfast. And yes, it'll hold you until the afternoon if you pace yourself. Then there's goat cheese, salty, dry, and crumbly. Sometimes aged, sometimes smoked, always briny. It travels well, never spoils fast, and replenishes salts lost through sweat. Your body needs that balance out here. Salt isn't an enemy, it's survival. Pair that with a bit of flatbread, usually baked fresh, right on the fire using hot stones or a thin pan nestled in the embers. No yeast, Just flour, water, a bit of oil, and heat. The result? Dense, warm, slightly charred discs you can tear with your hands and share without shame. You don't eat alone in the desert. Meals are communal, even the smallest one. A handful of dates, shared, a chunk of bread, broken and offered. Even if food is scarce, and it is, hospitality trumps hunger. You'd rather go without than refuse a guest. That's the Bedouin code. Historians still argue whether this strict generosity was practical, spiritual, or performative. Probably a mix of all three. But one thing is sure, it bound tribes together in the face of unrelenting scarcity. Sometimes you get lucky. Someone just milked the goats and there's a little fresh labin to pour. Tangy, sour, rich. You drink it slowly. The fermentation helps your stomach process it gently in the heat. It hydrates and nourishes. And your gut, toughened by years of microbes, thanks you. Meat is rare, reserved for special occasions, visiting dignitaries, or big family events. And when it happens, it's not wasteful. You use everything. Camel meat, goat, even lizards in more remote tribes. Roasted, boiled, or dried. Fat rendered, organs used, bones cracked for marrow. And the fat, that's key. Fat burns slow. Out here, it's what keeps your internal fire smoldering gently through cold desert nights and high-energy treks. One fringe practice you'd only hear whispered about, eating locusts. When swarms blew through the Arabian Peninsula, Bedouins would catch them in large nets, roast them on open fires, and eat them whole. Crunchy, nutritious, slightly terrifying, but again, protein is protein. And then there's coffee. Oh, the coffee. Not the double latte oat milk caramel whipped kind. This is gawa, bitter, spiced, black as night. Brewed in a long-necked pot called a dalla, poured in tiny handleless cups. You sip it sitting cross-legged on a rug, listening to the fire crackle. The coffee is laced with cardamom, sometimes cloves, sometimes saffron if you're lucky. It's not about caffeine, it's about ritual. You never fill the cup fully. That would be rude. You pour a third, you drink, you hand it back, it's refilled. 3 sips maximum, that's the rule. Anything more, that's a message. Either you're incredibly welcome or you're incredibly annoying. And you burn the coffee grounds afterward, letting the smoke drift through the tent, warding off flies and lingering spirits. Every part of the meal has meaning. There's a rhythm to it: prepare, serve, share, cleanse. Even with nothing, you create something. A moment of normalcy, of civilization in the wilderness. And yes, sometimes food does run out. Then you chew dried leaves, boil bitter roots, or fast. Not for religion, though that's part of it, but because scarcity is the default setting here. Hunger isn't a crisis, it's a Tuesday. You know how to manage it. You plan your portions. You adjust your pace. You listen to your body. Not like a wellness influencer, but like someone who knows that misreading a stomach cramp could end with you face down in the sand, praying for a miracle. And even the way you eat changes. No silverware, obviously. You use your right hand always. Your fingers become the tools: pinch, scoop, fold, lift. You don't waste a single crumb. If you do, someone older will notice, and they will comment. Because every meal here, no matter how small, is a gift, a chance to survive another day, a quiet act of defiance against the desert. So you eat the dates, you drink the milk, you tear the bread, and you smile at the person across from you, whether they're family, stranger, or possible enemy. Because even in this brutal place, maybe especially here, food is a kind of peace. The sun isn't just high, it's hovering, mocking you. A great white eye in a sky scrubbed clean of mercy. You've already drunk what you can, eaten what you had, and now comes the hardest part of the day, the wait. Because out here, timing is everything. You don't move at noon. You don't think at noon. You endure noon. The desert isn't just hot, it's calibrated. A rhythm. A beat that you ignore at your peril. Every Bedouin, young, old, tired, strong, knows this dance. So you move early, very early. You rise before the stars have even blinked out, just a breath after the final prayer of the night. The first light isn't even light, it's a memory of blue. And you're already up, loading the camels, tying ropes, stretching joints. This is when the world is kindest, when even the sand seems cool, when you can walk without boiling your own footprints into the earth. The Bedouins called this time Sahar, the true dawn, not sunrise, not yet. Just that soft hush before the sky remembers it's the desert. You travel then, as fast as your animals can manage before the sun gets its claws in. By 10 a.m., you've stopped, tents go up, camels sit. You find shade, even if it's the illusion of shade, even if it's your own shadow, and you wait. Historians still argue whether this daily pause came purely from climate necessity or had spiritual roots. Likely both, because when the sun is at its zenith, the world doesn't just burn, it pauses. Even your thoughts move slower. So you rest. But you don't sleep, not deeply, not in the sun's domain. You lie on your back, arms crossed. You breathe slow. You count your heartbeat. If you're lucky, the air shifts. If you're really lucky, a Gabara wind, hot, yes, but moving, picks up, giving just enough motion to the stifling heat. Enough to keep you from slipping into that dangerous kind of stillness that leads to dehydration. And the silence, oh, the silence. No birds, no insects, just wind. Just the faint groaning of the sand as it repositions itself grain by grain. You think you hear voices, but you don't. It's just the echo of heat in your ears, a kind of mirage in sound. And then comes Asr, the late afternoon prayer. The sun has begun its slow descent, the light shifting from blinding to gold. Still hot, yes, but less cruel, that's your signal. You move again. Even the camels seem to sigh in relief. Now's the time to hunt, to mend, to cook, to stitch the tent flaps, to talk. You get things done during the golden hour. The body can function again. The brain cooperates. You're no longer cooking from the inside out. You travel again just for a while, especially if you're between oases. And this time the world looks different. Shadows stretch. The dunes glow like molten bronze. You know the landmarks now. That jagged ridge, you've seen it before. That slope of rock that curves like a sleeping dog, familiar. You trust the land to repeat itself, even as it shifts. By sunset, everything changes again. You stop, you pray. You build a fire not because you need heat, but because you need light and company. Fire brings both. It flickers in the breeze like a secret language. You gather around it, knees tucked under robes, faces lit from below. Someone tells a joke. Someone else recites a line of poetry about lost love or lost camels. Same thing, really. And then comes night travel. Yes, night. Only sometimes, and only if the moon is right. You watch the sky like a clock. A bright moon, perfect. Cool, steady light that lets you see without fire. A dark moon, dangerous. You don't risk the terrain if the shadows can swallow you whole. But if the stars align, literally, you pack up after dinner, hitch the animals, and walk under a sky so full of stars it looks like it might spill. The sand is cold now, crunchy beneath your feet. Your breath fogs in the cool air, and every now and then you look up and find your direction in the constellations your grandfather taught you. They have names, those stars, and meanings, that one. It tells you north, that one. It means water within 2 days, that tight cluster. You whisper a blessing when you pass beneath it. It never hurts. One quirky tradition. Some tribes used crickets as timekeepers. Their chirping rhythm changed based on the temperature, and older Bedouins could estimate how close they were to dawn based on the sound alone. Another strange but real habit. Some seasoned travelers carried small hourglass-shaped water timers, primitive devices that used dripping to measure time passed during short rests. Completely impractical but deeply ceremonial, because even time in the desert is watched. You don't rush, that's the biggest rule. You time your life in breath, in shade, in instinct. Every hour has a mood. Every shadow tells a story. And if you misread either, you pay for it in sweat, strength, or something worse. So you learn to wait when the sun waits, to move when the moon nods, and always, always to listen to the wind first. Because in the desert, survival isn't about strength, It's about timing. You squint into the heat haze, but you don't need to see clearly, you hear them first. The soft groan of their padded feet shifting over sand, the wet snort of breath, the unmistakable guttural chewing of something dry and unappetizing, your companion for this hellish journey. A camel. Scratch that, your only chance in this place is a camel. They don't just carry you, they carry the system. The Bedouins didn't just ride camels, they revolved around them like moons to a planet. And you're quickly learning that the camel isn't just an animal, it's an ancient desert cheat code, a walking refrigerator, a tank, a joke and a miracle rolled into one spitting, grumpy lump. You pat its side, rough, almost greasy hair. Heat practically shimmers off its back. And yet, it's perfectly fine, strolling like it's a casual spring day in some temperate garden, not 100+ degree oven of wind and dust. How? Because evolution did something very weird and very specific. It designed this beast for exactly your kind of suffering. Camels regulate heat better than you can dream. Their blood doesn't thicken when dehydrated. Their fat is stored in humps, not all over, so heat can escape their bodies efficiently. Their nostrils, built like miniature AC units. They can close tightly during sandstorms and condense moisture from their own breath to conserve water. Yes, they recycle their own breath. And those iconic humps, they're not water tanks. Pop quiz, what's in there? Fat, pure energy storage. When the rest of the world thought water storage was the priority, the camel said, "Nah, I'll just turn this into a travel buffet." They can go a week or more without drinking in extreme heat and not die. When they finally do drink, they'll inhale gallons in minutes. Watching it happen is unsettling. You blink and suddenly they've vacuumed up an entire trough like they've been dared to. But it's not just water. Camels radiate survival. Bedouins drank camel milk, rich in iron, vitamin C, and electrolytes. In the harshest parts of the Rub al Khali, the empty quarter, sometimes it was the only liquid they consumed for days. And if you're asking yourself, did they really ride all day in 110-degree heat, sipping warm camel milk straight from the source? Yes, they did. And so do you now. And yes, it's warm and weirdly salty, but you live another day. Now here's something wilder, camel urine. Yeah, we're going there. Some Bedouin healers believed it had medicinal properties, for skin ailments, for internal health. Some modern researchers even studied it somehow. Still, historians argue whether its use was widespread or just tribal-specific folklore. Either way, you're not drinking it, but it's in the toolkit. And you haven't even looked inside the saddlebags. Camels carried everything: tent poles, rugs, extra water skins, dried meat, grain for barter, spare sandals, even small children. They were SUVs before SUVs, and somehow they'd carry 300, 600 pounds and just shrug. You try lifting a camel saddle and your spine regrets being born. And then there's the camel's temperature trick. They let their body heat rise during the day up to 106 degrees F, 41 degrees C, to avoid sweating. That's right. They intentionally overheat so they don't waste moisture. Then they cool off at night, their bodies syncing with the desert rhythm better than any smartwatch. Ever heard of a camel kneecap? No, that's because it's buried under thick calloused pads. When the sand is hot enough to melt your brain, camels kneel right down into it like they're lounging on silk. No burns, no flinching, just desert royalty vibes. And the camel's feet, ridiculous. Wide, leathery, two-toed hooves that don't sink into sand. You, meanwhile, are still finding bits of yesterday's dune in your shoes, your robe, your teeth. Now, Bedouins didn't just ride camels, they raced them, sang to them, named them, bragged about them. Some tribes believed that the best camels could understand full sentences. Others whispered that a camel with a star-shaped birthmark could sense death coming. Fringe stuff, sure. But if you spend enough nights alone with one, staring at the same moon, you might start to believe they know something too. You form bonds, real ones. Lose your camel, you're dead. Make your camel angry, good luck. They remember, they hold grudges. They will bite, kick, and spit with Olympic precision, but treat them well, they kneel for you, wait for you, nuzzle your shoulder like an oversized sand puppy. There's an old joke. You don't own a camel, you borrow its patience. So you learn to whisper instead of shout. You learn to sway with their gait instead of resist it. And after enough days out here, you swear you feel what they feel. When the sand's too hot, when a storm's approaching, when it's time to rest. The camel becomes your barometer, your compass, your seat, and your sanity. And when the sun burns high overhead and every breath tastes like dusted bone, you glance sideways. Your camel hasn't blinked, hasn't flinched. Still moving. So you move too. You've made it this far. The heat's no joke, but you're still upright, thanks to your camel and maybe that lukewarm gulp of milk that tasted like regret. But now comes the part where Bedouin ingenuity really kicks in. Because the desert is merciless, yes, but it's also predictable. And the Bedouins, masters of patterns. Survival here didn't come from brute strength, it came from trickery, hacks, tiny, clever habits passed down like sacred code. And now it's your turn to learn them. First, you stop walking, not because you're lazy, but because it's midday. The sun is a vengeful god right now, and the air is thick with shimmering waves. In Bedouin culture, this is not the time to travel. It's the time to disappear. You scan for a dune, yes, that one, and walk to its leeward side where shadow huddles like a secret. Dig. You heard that right. You scoop out a shallow trench about half a foot deep. The surface sand is hellishly hot, but just below it, cooler. You lay a rug or your robe down in that hollow and sit. It's not a five-star resort, but when you lie back and feel that faint temperature difference, it's magic. This is what survival looks like, inch by inch wins. Next trick, you bury your water jar, ceramic slightly porous. The wind, hot as it is, pulls moisture through the surface, creating evaporative cooling. You dig a shallow pit, plop the jar in, and cover it lightly with a damp cloth. Come back in an hour and it's almost cold. Not ice cream cold, more like lukewarm soda on a cloudy day cold. But in this furnace, it tastes like mountain spring. Even better, you don't chug it. You sip, tiny amounts swirled in the mouth before swallowing. That's the Bedouin way. You don't just hydrate the body, you trick it into thinking it's been quenched. One desert explorer once joked, if you're never thirsty, you're doing it wrong. You learn to breathe through cloth. Not for dust, though that's a bonus. It moistens the air before it hits your lungs. A simple headscarf pulled just right keeps your breath humid and your throat from feeling like sandpaper wrapped in regret. Now let's talk wind. You think any breeze is a blessing. Not so fast. A hot wind can steal moisture from your body faster than sweating. So what do? You listen. You watch the dunes. Bedouins tracked the sound of the wind across the landscape. A low whistle meant still air was breaking. A high-pitched hiss meant particles were in motion. They'd orient camp accordingly, always with tents braced to funnel airflow across the shelter, not through it. One tribe even used tongue testing. A quick flick of the tongue into the air told them how dry the wind was. Fringe trick, maybe, or just a really well-honed sense of survival. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or romanticized nonsense. Either way, you give it a try. It doesn't do much except dry out your mouth. But hey, you're committed now. Another trick. Carry charcoal. Not to cook, to smell. Sounds weird. It is. But here's the logic. Charcoal absorbs smells. In a closed tent on a windless day, things can get ripe. A bit of charcoal in a small bowl kept the air more breathable. Modern science actually backs this up. Activated carbon is still used in air filters today. Once again, the desert taught something that laboratories would only later confirm. You're sweating less now. Not because it's cooler, but because you're moving smarter. Like storing your food under your bedding during the day. Like drying clothes only in the late afternoon to avoid bleaching and stiffening. Like sleeping in a zigzag pattern to stay in your own tent's shifting shade. Yes, these were real things. Desert logic turns you into a minimalist magician. And let's not forget the salt trick. Bedouins carried little pouches of dried salt mixed with herbs or just scraped from dried meat. Not for flavor, but for survival. Sweating drains sodium. Without replenishment, muscles cramp, minds fog. So you, smart desert traveler that you are, nibble on a salt-crusted date and feel your body sigh in relief. Another hour earned. You pick up the habit of clinking pebbles in your palm, not out of boredom, to keep rhythm, to time your walk. Bedouin travelers used stones like metronomes, 1 step per click. It kept their gait steady, which reduced sweating. Plus, it sounds kind of cool, like you're casting a spell with every step. Now here's a fringe fact. Some Bedouins believe that carrying a dried lizard tail would protect against sunstroke. Is it true? Not at all. But when you're alone under a blazing sky, any sliver of hope, superstition or not, feels like armor. And honestly, you could use the boost. But the cleverest trick of all, observation. You're not just walking across sand, you're reading it. You notice how darker grains mean retained heat. You spot how animal tracks veer toward shadow. You learn to judge time by the sharpness of your own shadow. A Bedouin once claimed he could tell the hour within 15 minutes just by standing and looking down. You test it. You're off by 40 minutes. Not bad for your first week. Everything here is a signal. Everything is a teacher. And so you adapt. By now, you've ditched your wristwatch. Your body becomes your compass, your water bottle, your treasure, your camel, your barometer, your robe, your armor. You no longer try to fight the heat. You dance with it, duck when it strikes, hide when it bellows. And slowly, weirdly, you begin to enjoy the game. Because that's what desert life is, a puzzle, a test. And the Bedouins, they weren't just tough, they were brilliant. They hacked survival with habits passed down through smoky campfire stories and shadow plays inside flapping tents. You're a little scorched, a little sun-kissed, but smarter now. And ready for the next trick. The sun's fatting now, sinking behind a sea of dunes that shimmer gold like hammered brass. But don't get excited, nightfall doesn't mean relief. Not here. In the desert, dusk is a switch flip. One moment you're baking, the next, you're freezing. You pull your robe tighter, but the wind slips through the weave like it knows where your warmth lives. Welcome to the second challenge of Bedouin survival, temperature whiplash. See, the desert is a place of extremes. No cloud cover, no trees, no water to hold onto heat. As soon as the sun disappears, so does the warmth. Bedouins learn to prepare long before that moment. You would have too if you were raised here. No one waits for night to start layering up. They begin before sundown. You followed their lead, draping your bisht cloak over your head, trapping what little heat you have. The funny part, it's still technically the same day. Just a few hours ago, you were trying not to melt. Now you're trying not to shiver. The desert isn't cruel, it's just dramatic. And speaking of drama, here comes the wind. Night wind in the desert has a personality. Not fierce like midday gusts. It's quieter, sneakier. It finds your ankles, your wrists, any patch of skin you forgot to shield. Bedouins knew this well, so they designed their tents not just for sun, but for this nocturnal ambush. Wool panels wrapped around the base. Extra rugs stuffed at the seams. They built windbreaks from stacked saddles and firewood. Every fold, every lash had a reason. There's a fire crackling now, and thank heaven for it. Not just for heat, but to cook, to light the space, to fend off predators, two-legged or otherwise, and to make the night feel less endless. A central flame anchors the camp like a heartbeat. You sit near it, rubbing your hands together while sparks climb toward the stars like they're in a hurry. Dinner's simple: dates, dried meat, flatbread, and maybe a steaming bowl of rice if someone was feeling ambitious. The taste, earthy, comforting, smoked by the fire and dusted with the day's fatigue. You eat slowly, not because you're being polite, because you want the warmth to last. Then comes the tea, always tea. Strong black brewed until it could melt a spoon, poured in tiny cups, never filled more than halfway. Why? So it doesn't cool too fast and so you drink more rounds. Each refill is a ritual. You pass the cup, tilt it, nod. Even in the cold, etiquette matters. And this is where you learn another Bedouin survival trick: connection. They didn't just survive the desert with tents and cloaks. They survived with stories. As the fire dies to embers, someone leans in and starts telling one. Maybe it's about a jinn who haunted a dry well. Maybe it's about a lion seen 2 moons ago. Maybe it's just a tale about someone's grandfather walking 3 days for salt. Doesn't matter. The voice carries warmth. And in the dark, huddled together, warmth is everything. Historians still argue whether these oral traditions were consistent across Bedouin tribes or if each family invented their own. But what's certain? These stories did more than pass time. They passed down knowledge. Coded in them were weather patterns, star routes, medicinal herbs, and cautionary tales of what not to eat. You're not just entertained, you're instructed. You look up, the sky is ridiculous. Impossible stars, bright enough to cast shadows. No pollution, no lights, no distractions. Just you and a universe so big, it makes your worries shrink to sand grain size. You get why Bedouins were excellent navigators. With constellations like these, how could they not be? The Big Dipper points to the North Star. Orion's belt marks the changing seasons. Venus glows like a lantern hung just for you. Some tribes believed stars were souls. Others swore they were divine eyes watching. You lie back, your robe wrapped like a cocoon, your head resting on a saddlebag. The earth still holds some of the day's heat, but only just. You're grateful for the layered wool under your back and the camel hair blanket over your chest. Everything here has purpose. And here's the strange part. You're not just surviving anymore. You're settling in. You've learned not to waste movement, not to underestimate silence. You've learned the signs of dehydration before your mouth goes dry. You've learned the way a single ember can make you feel human again. Fringe fact time. Some Bedouins used to coat their tent ropes in goat fat. Why? To keep them from freezing stiff overnight. Others claim this also confused insects. Not a glamorous trick, but an effective one. Your own rope stays soft and flexible. Another quiet win. The wind whistles through the dunes like it's singing lullabies to the sand. You close your eyes, but not for long. Because the fire's dying, and someone needs to take first watch. Yes, watch. Because the desert may be empty by day, but it's busy at night. Scorpions, hyenas, wild dogs, even thieves. You take a stick, stir the fire, and wrap yourself tighter, keeping one eye on the darkness beyond the tent flaps. This isn't paranoia, it's protocol. Every Bedouin camp had a system, 2-hour shifts, one person always awake, not just to guard against danger, but to mind the animals, feed the fire, and pray. Yes, prayer. Even at 3 a.m., the desert didn't pause for devotion, it demanded it. And in this stillness, you understand why. Because in the desert, night isn't just a void. It's a test of what you've learned, a whisper of everything you've endured, and a preview of the heat waiting for you tomorrow. Still, you sit quietly listening, not for threats, for the subtle click of a pebble shifting in the wind, the snort of your camel settling into its knees, the soft crunch of another watcher swapping shifts. These are your lullabies now. This is your rhythm. And somewhere in the cold and dark, between the fire's last breath and the first hint of dawn, you find something unexpected. Not fear, not fatigue, but belonging. Dawn doesn't announce itself loudly in the desert. It slips in, shy and pink, touching the tops of the dunes like a painter testing their brush. You notice it before you really see it. Your breath comes a little easier, the chill softens just enough, and the shadows you've been watching all night begin to shift. You're still up, the last hour of your watch, and honestly, you don't mind. Something about these early moments feels sacred, quiet but alive, like the world is holding its breath before the inferno begins again. You stretch your legs, shake the stiffness from your joints, and nudge the coals. A few sparks flutter up like fireflies. You add a stick, dry, brittle, stolen from the skeleton of a long-dead shrub, and it catches with a sigh. Fire's not just heat out here. It's identity, a tether to the land, a small rebellion against the emptiness. The others stir slowly. No alarms, just instinct trained into muscle. Bedouins didn't sleep in late, too dangerous, too hot. The best travel happens early, when the sand is still cool enough not to burn your soles through your sandals. So you start preparing, even before the sun fully crests. This next part, it's all about mobility. You've probably guessed by now, Bedouins weren't meant to stay in one place. Permanence is a liability when you live in a land where one wrong day can turn your oasis into a grave. Everything they built, wore, ate, or carried had to answer one question: can I pack this up and move it before the sun gets cruel? That's why the tent comes down fast. You'd be amazed how quickly it folds. Each pole, each rope, each rug rolled with practiced precision. The tent isn't just a house, it's a partner, a creature to be fed, folded, and carried. You help roll the fabric, it's heavier than you thought. That's the goat wool. Remember, breathable in heat, insulating in cold, and shockingly durable. You're sweating already. It's not even 7 a.m. Now it's time to load the camels. Ah, camels, the original desert SUV. You've bonded with yours, maybe reluctantly. She's temperamental, tall, and smells faintly like fermented hay and pride. But she saved your life, more than once. Camels are miracles in shaggy coats. They can carry hundreds of pounds, walk for days without water, and kneel obediently as you hoist your gear. Bedouins didn't just own camels, they respected them. Some tribes even recited poetry to them. Love poems, no less. Because a happy camel is a cooperative camel, and when your life depends on your ride not sitting down mid-dune out of spite, you get poetic too. Your camel's saddle is wide and padded, with wooden arches and woven bags hanging like oversized saddlebags. Everything is tied down. Nothing is wasted. The rhythm of loading is almost musical: lift, wrap, lash, repeat. It's hypnotic. And here's the wild bit. Historians still argue whether Bedouin camel saddles originated in South Arabia or somewhere along old Silk Road trade routes. The truth is buried under centuries of shifting sands and borrowed designs. What's undeniable, though, is that these saddles were marvels of ergonomic engineering, long before the word ergonomic was invented. Before departure, there's one last ritual: checking the sky. No weather apps here, no forecasts, just eyes, clouds, wind, and memory. The elders scan the horizon, sniff the air, squint at the color of the sky. You try it too, because you're part of this now. Maybe the wind smells a little like salt. Maybe the clouds are piled low and fat. Is that good, bad? You're not sure yet. You sip one last cup of scalding tea. Breakfast is quick, just a hunk of hard bread and a few salty olives, eaten while crouching by the fire's ashes. You tuck the rest into your sash. Meals on the move are standard. Then, like clockwork, the caravan begins to move. It's not chaotic, it's ballet. Quiet calls, soft clicks, the creak of saddles, the jangle of metal charms tied to camel harnesses, said to ward off evil spirits. The sun breaks the horizon like a blade. It cuts fast. The coolness flees and the heat returns like it never left. Now you're riding, swaying with the motion, your knees braced, your hands wrapped around the front bar. The sand stretches in every direction, more sea than earth. Dunes like frozen waves. Shadows carving lines that trick your eyes. It's beautiful and brutal, and deeply, deeply isolating. Except you're not alone. You look around. A dozen others, all riding in silence, cloaked in earth tones. It's as if the desert shaped them out of itself. Some hum quietly, some pray. One child behind you sings nonsense songs to a goat. You smile. This part of the day is about distance, covering as much ground as possible before the sun becomes hostile. You're heading to a new grazing spot, or a well, or maybe just away from yesterday's problems. Bedouins rarely moved without reason. Sometimes they followed the rain. Yes, they chased it, because where there's rain, there's grass. And where there's grass, there's life. Herds survive, children eat, people endure. It's here you learn about gutha, a word used to describe new pasture. Green, soft, temporary. The kind of gift the desert gives only for a moment, and it's worth the journey. Quirky side note, some tribes used to predict grazing quality by tasting the sand. That's not a joke. Lick your finger, press it into the soil, give it a sniff. A trained nomad could tell if camels would like the grass by flavor. You're not quite there yet, but you try it. It mostly tastes like despair. Mid-morning arrives fast. Heat presses from above, but also below, radiating up from the sand like an oven. You adjust your head wrap, squint through the haze. You thought you were tough after one desert night. Cute. Still, you press on. The whole group does, because this is Bedouin life. Constant motion, constant adjustment, constant survival. And as you ride, as the camel lumbers forward, as your shadow shortens with the rising sun, a quiet truth settles over you. This isn't just endurance. It's choreography. You move with the desert, not against it. You listen, adapt, respect. The Bedouins didn't conquer the wilderness. They partnered with it. And somehow, in their dust-covered, sun-scorched, wind-chapped way, they flourished. You shift in your saddle, sip from your goatskin water bag, and glance toward the lead rider, the one who knows where you're headed. You don't need a map. You need trust. And perhaps a little more tea. The sun is a tyrant now. It hangs overhead like a judgment, brilliant and blinding. You can feel it in your teeth. The air tastes baked, and even your camel seems to squint as it moves. This is no longer pleasant warmth or a photogenic golden hour. This is the hour of survival. And you're in the thick of it. You tug your keffiyeh tighter over your face. It helps, but not by much. The heat is everywhere, slipping through fabric, radiating off rock, even breathing from your own skin. You feel the layers of your robe clinging slightly with sweat, but here's the irony. Covering up is actually your best defense. It sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? Strip down in the heat, right? That's what modern logic says. But Bedouins knew better. They draped themselves in light-colored, loose-fitting fabrics not to keep heat in, but to keep sunlight out. Those long robes create pockets of cooler air between cloth and skin, like your own private shade. If you were wandering around half-naked, you'd roast like a kebab on a stick. Even your camel is dressed for the occasion. A light cloth draped over her hump, sometimes soaked at rest stops for evaporation. They don't complain much, because camels are, frankly, better at this than you. Their bodies regulate heat so efficiently that a human looks like a leaky radiator by comparison. They can let their body temperature rise over 100 degrees F to avoid sweating, and then cool themselves down at night. You, meanwhile, are a soggy mess with sunburned ears. At the next rest stop, the group circles up in the lee of a dune. There's no shade, no trees in sight, but the sand's curve provides just enough of a windbreak. You dismount, grateful to stretch your legs, even if they're a bit jelly-like. Someone hands around a bundle of dried figs. Someone else starts boiling water for tea. Yes, tea in this heat. Because, and here's your quirky cultural whiplash, drinking hot liquids in extreme heat actually helps you sweat more efficiently, triggering your body's evaporative cooling system without shocking it. Cold water, in contrast, can fool your system into constricting blood vessels. That's why desert dwellers sip hot tea under the hottest sun. The logic might not make sense at first sip, but you'll get it. Or you'll just learn to pretend you enjoy it. As you sip, you listen. There's always storytelling in the pauses. The old man, face leathered like a dried date, recounts a tale of a storm that turned the sky black with sand. He points to a line on the horizon. That's where the earth disappeared, he says. The others nod solemnly. They remember, or they pretend to. Either way, stories are currency out here. Memory is survival. And then someone mentions the jinn. Yes, jinn, the spirits of the desert. Westerners think of them as cartoon genies or blue wish granters, but to Bedouins, jinn were part of the landscape. Invisible, unpredictable, often dangerous. They lived in lonely places, haunted wells, hid in caves, and followed travelers at night. If your camel refused to move, jinn. If someone got lost despite knowing the terrain, jinn. If the wind suddenly shifted, carrying voices that didn't belong, definitely jinn. You laugh nervously, but then you remember the night wind and the howling you heard while half asleep. You chalked it up to coyotes, or was it? Historians still argue whether the belief in jinn predates Islam, or whether it evolved alongside the region's shifting spiritual frameworks. What's clear is that for the Bedouins, jinn weren't superstition. They were part of the practical psychology of surviving a place so vast and unforgiving that even logic occasionally needs a break. So they lit incense, tied charms to their tents, whispered protective verses as they moved through jinn-haunted lands. You glance at the charm tied to your camel's harness, 3 beads and a bit of knotted cloth, for luck, for protection, for peace of mind. Break over. The sun isn't getting any gentler and you've still got hours to go before the next well. The group rises. Camels are coaxed upright with soft clicks and tugs. You remount, muscles aching. Your water bag is lighter. You're lighter. The terrain shifts. Now you're crossing Hamada, flat, rocky desert. Not the romantic, rolling dunes of postcards, but a hellscape of blackened stones and cracked earth. The heat bounces off these surfaces with even more force. You feel like you're walking through a kiln. There's a reason Bedouins time their travel with such care. Get caught here during peak heat, and even the air feels aggressive. You wrap your robe tighter. You keep moving. You don't stop to admire the landscape. Because this place doesn't want to be admired, it wants to be respected. At one point, your guide raises a hand. Everyone halts. Ahead lies a mirage. You blink, it looks like water, like a blue ribbon stretching between the hills, but it's not. You know it's not. It's the atmosphere playing tricks, heat bending light into lies. The Bedouins know better than to chase these illusions. But you're still mesmerized. It's beautiful and cruel, like the desert itself. And here's a curious bit of trivia. Bedouins developed a unique gait when walking long distances through intense heat. It's not quite a shuffle, not quite a stride, more of a sand-skimming glide that conserves energy and reduces sweat. You try it. You trip. Your camel snorts. Eventually, the terrain softens again. There's a low depression ahead flanked by palms, an actual oasis. Not a postcard mirage, but the real deal. Water, though brackish, a few bushes, the whisper of shade. And birds, not many, but enough to make your heart lift. Even in this scorched world, life pulses just beneath the surface. The group slows. Here at last is a place to rest until evening. Because Bedouins weren't foolish. They knew that midday was for waiting, not wandering. That survival meant humility. You set down your gear, sink onto a mat, and tilt your face toward a sliver of shade like it's holy. The heat doesn't vanish. But for now, it retreats. You made it through the hardest part of the day. Barely. The desert finally exhales. As the sun begins its slow, molten descent toward the horizon, you feel the shift in your bones. The light changes first, from punishing white to golden amber, and then the temperature follows, dropping degree by blessed degree. There's a brief moment where it's actually pleasant, almost cool, but you don't trust it. Because you know what comes next. The desert's heat doesn't vanish. It hides. And by the time night falls fully, that same sand that once tried to cook you will now try to freeze you. You prepare accordingly. Layering up in the desert feels absurd until you've lived it. You wrap another shawl around your shoulders, not because you're trying to be dramatic, but because the temperature swing between day and night can be as extreme as 50 degrees F in a matter of hours. It's not just uncomfortable, it can be dangerous. Exposure isn't reserved for mountaintops. In the deep silence of a desert night, it comes quietly with a shiver. You sit with the others around the fire. Someone is cooking flatbread on a stone, thin, round, blistered, fragrant. The smell fills the oasis like a lullaby. You hold out your hands to the flame, wincing a little from the earlier sunburn, but welcoming the warmth nonetheless. You think back to midday, how the rocks nearly blistered your soles, how the air shimmered with menace. But now it's a completely different world. The stars are already blooming overhead, unbothered by clouds or light pollution. You can see forever. The sky here isn't just black, it's alive. There's no ceiling to it. And this is when the real stories come out. Around the fire, the elders begin their ritual of remembering. Stories of ancestors who crossed hundreds of miles with nothing but goats, instinct, and the occasional helpful wind. Of how to read the stars, not just to know your direction, but to understand when a season shifts or a storm approaches. You learn the position of Sirius, how its appearance marked the time for certain migrations. The desert has no clocks, but the heavens have always been reliable timekeepers. Look for the scorpion's tail, one man says, pointing up. That one tells us the heat, almost done. You stare upward until your neck aches, but eventually you see it. A curl of stars shaped like a hooked tail, lurking low in the sky. Bedouins pass this knowledge down orally, generation to generation. Star maps built on memory, not paper. Still, historians argue whether all these constellations were purely practical, or if they held deeper, perhaps mystical meanings. Were they navigation tools or stories written by ancestors long gone? Maybe both, maybe more. Someone passes you a cup, strong tea again. It burns a little less now that the wind is cool. You sip, grateful for something warm. And then someone else brings out a skin of fermented camel milk garis. It's sharp, funky, definitely an acquired taste. You try to nod politely through the aftertaste. They laugh knowingly. It's not for tourists. And here comes the night wind. It creeps first as a breeze, then stiffens into a steady, restless current. It cuts straight through the layers you thought were enough. Cloaks are pulled tighter. Fires are fed. Camels grunt and shift, curling down into resting poses like ships dropping anchor. But the cold doesn't just threaten bodies, it tests your mind. Out here in the silence, you become keenly aware of your own thoughts. There's no city hum, no Wi-Fi signal, no background noise to drown out that old, annoying voice in your head. It starts whispering things about your limits, your comforts, your craving for a thermostat and a soft mattress. That's part of why Bedouin hospitality is so famously intense. When someone stumbles into your tent, cold and lost, you take them in. Not out of politeness, but because you know what the night can do to a lone traveler. You offer warmth, food, stories, safety. There's no such thing as selfishness when the desert might eat a person by morning. In fact, Bedouin codes of hospitality are some of the oldest and most sacred unwritten laws in the region, guiding behavior far beyond just niceties. A traveler might be an enemy, a thief, a liar, doesn't matter. You host them for 3 days, no questions asked. After that, then you can decide if they're trouble. As you try to settle down, you remember a tip from earlier. Bedouins sometimes sleep with heated stones tucked in their blankets. The same rocks that burned your skin today now radiate slow, stored warmth deep into the night. It's a trick borrowed from the earth itself. You lie back, shoulder to shoulder with others in the tent. There's not much personal space, but out here proximity is insulation. Blankets are piled. The fire dims. The camels huff quietly outside. And here's something funny. Despite all the cold, despite the wind and the hard ground, you're falling asleep faster than you have in weeks. The exhaustion is total, the kind that lives in your bones. Your eyelids aren't just heavy, they're done. But just before sleep takes you, you think about this rhythm. This life paced not by alarms or traffic lights, but by the sun, the sand, the stars. It's not glamorous. It's not Instagrammable, but it's ancient. It works. And somehow it feels right. Maybe that's the strangest part. That you could get used to this. When the first prayer call floats across the dunes, it doesn't startle you. You've already been awake for a while, half dozing, half listening to the wind's slow retreat. The cold lingers, but the fire's embers still glow faintly orange, and a camel outside is snorting itself awake. You shift under your blanket. Someone stirs beside you. Then a soft rustle as someone else stands, already tying their headscarf in the half-light. You're not a morning person. At least, you weren't before all this. But out here, mornings aren't a choice. They arrive not with alarm clocks, but with change. The light begins to throb across the sand, faint pink and bruised at first, then gold and relentless. You don't just wake up, you emerge, like the desert itself is pushing you up into another day. And today will be hot. But before the heat can reclaim its throne, the camp moves with early purpose. Fire is rekindled. Tea brewed again, stronger this time. No luxury lattes, just crushed herbs and heat. Flatbreads are slapped into shape, cooked on smooth stones or iron plates and eaten warm, sometimes with soft cheese or dates if you're lucky. Nothing fancy, just what works. Because this is the time to act. The asterisk cool morning hours are precious. Asterisk, everything happens now. If you wait too long, the sun becomes an enemy again, and there's work to be done. Today, you're joining a water run. You wouldn't call it glamorous. You're not descending into mystical blue springs or wandering into secret oases with lush palm trees and gentle waterfalls. No, most water out here is hard-won and looks disappointing. You walk with the others to a known point, somewhere you would never find alone. There's a well, but not the cute stone circle kind from children's books. This is just a hole, ringed with worn rocks and bits of dry brush to mark its edges. It's been here for generations, a quiet sentinel in the sand. Someone lowers a goatskin bucket by rope. It takes forever. The water down there is deep, silent, and invisible. You wonder how anyone ever knew it was there. According to one of the older men, a now-dead ancestor followed the behavior of birds and insects, and somehow figured out this was the spot. Or maybe he just got lucky, he says with a grin. Historians still argue whether Bedouins used dowsing techniques, followed migratory patterns, or simply passed down well locations through strict oral tradition. Maybe all of the above. Whatever the truth, it worked. These secret reservoirs dot the landscape, mostly unknown to outsiders. You finally see the bucket return, water splashing, sloshing. It smells earthy. Not fresh, but it's wet, and that's enough. The group doesn't waste a drop. It's poured into goatskins or clay jars. You help carry one, surprised by its weight. This single haul might need to last a few days. And that's when it hits you. Every drop here has a destiny. Nothing is wasted. Water isn't just survival, it's identity. It governs mood, decisions, the layout of travel, even where you tell stories. It determines life. As the sun climbs, so do the shadows, longer, sharper. The heat returns and it arrives angry. The winds pick up dust, and you understand why people wear scarves wrapped tight across their faces. It's not fashion, it's armor. You duck back toward camp with the others, already sweating, the water supplies clinking and shifting beside you. You've only walked a few miles, but the effort feels multiplied. Every step costs something. And here's the catch. This isn't even peak summer. That's when temperatures soar past 120 degrees F and shade becomes fantasy. There are tales, some half-joking, of sandals melting and egg yolks frying on rock. You laugh when you hear it, but then you look at the rock beside you and wonder. Lunch is simple. You eat in the shade of the tent, flaps drawn tight with a bowl of rice and lentils passed around. Some dried figs. No meat today, it's reserved for special occasions. Food here isn't for indulgence. It's fuel, calculated and conserved. Still, there's pleasure in the small things. The way one of the younger kids tosses dried herbs into the cooking pot with a flourish, pretending to be a grand chef. The way the tea is poured from absurd heights, not to show off, but to aerate it. The way one elder insists on sprinkling everything with crushed dried lime, because otherwise it's just mush. You start to understand the rhythm, the the harmony between body and land. You don't push, you don't force, you pace yourself. And somewhere in this calm, the temperature tips again. Midday heat enters its cruelest hour. No one moves. And that's when you're told, now it's time to rest. Yes, rest. Nap, even. In a world that often tells you hustle is everything, the desert says the opposite. It tells you that survival is about knowing when to do nothing at all. Out here, siesta isn't laziness, it's life-preserving logic. So you lie back, belly full, eyes half-lidded, tent flaps rustling gently. The outside world is molten, but inside the shadows cradle you. You don't sleep deeply, but you rest, enough to be ready when the air shifts again. And by the time you rise, the sun has begun its inevitable slide downward just like yesterday. The patterns repeat, not in a boring way, but in a way that feels reliable, ancient, trusted. Before sunset, someone invites you to help prepare the fire again. You watch as dry dung, yes, that again, is added to the mix. It crackles with surprising efficiency. The flames jump to life. You've stopped being surprised by things that shouldn't work but do. You sip your evening tea, because of course there's more, and realize it doesn't taste strange anymore. It tastes right. And somewhere in your gut, you feel it. You're adapting. Not fully, not yet, but enough to understand why someone would choose this life, hard as it is. You still miss your air conditioner. You still fantasize about a cold soda. But the desert no longer feels hostile. It feels alive. And you're starting to feel like a part of it. You're walking again, but this time not to fetch water or to escape the heat. This is something else. A slow evening procession, the kind that doesn't follow a map but a memory. The sun hovers low now, dragging long shadows across the dunes like silk ribbons. Every grain of sand catches fire in the golden light, and for a moment, the entire desert looks like it's glowing from within. You trudge silently beside a few others. You've learned not to ask where you're going unless it's necessary. Because in Bedouin life, not everything is announced. Some things are felt. You eventually crest a low rise, and there, just ahead, is a circle of stones, carefully placed. A fire pit clearly old with signs of many meals cooked and stories shared. And around it, people are gathering, not just from your camp, but from others. A distant cousin from a neighboring clan, an older woman with 2 children, a wiry man with an oud slung across his back. Tonight is a majlis. Not the formal kind, the modern air-conditioned ones filled with velvet sofas and politics, but the old kind, the desert kind. A gathering for warmth, for talk, for keeping tradition alive long after the day's work ends. As the fire is lit and the first tongues of flame flicker to life, someone hands you a tiny cup of gawa, Arabic coffee, bitter and spiced with cardamom. You sip. It's still unfamiliar but not unpleasant. It reminds you of everything else here, bold, simple, and not asking your opinion. And then the stories begin. Some are funny. One man tells a tale of a camel that refused to sit down for 3 days straight, convinced it was under attack by jinn. Another recalls a childhood prank involving a scorpion in a cousin's tent. You laugh, the others laugh, and the sound carries, fragile but fearless, into the dark. Others are more serious. There's a legend of a woman who crossed the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, alone after her husband died in a tribal dispute. No map, no caravan, just her son, and a camel. They say she followed the stars and the smell of distant rain. No one knows if it's true. But truth, you're learning, isn't always the point. These stories aren't just entertainment. They're history, geography, philosophy. They're survival guides coded in metaphor. In a world where written records were once rare, oral tradition is king. And each tale is a seed passed down, desert to desert, heart to heart. Historians still argue whether the Bedouins, oral record-keeping rivals, written traditions in accuracy. Some say the margin of error is massive. Others insist that repetition and communal correction kept the facts startlingly intact. All you know is, When someone speaks here, people listen. The oud player strums a few low notes. It's a minor scale, plaintive and slow, and suddenly the mood shifts. The night gets deeper. A chill sneaks back in. You pull your shawl tighter. Now comes poetry. Not the rhyming greeting card kind, but real, old, fierce poetry. It's recited without notes. Verses about longing, honor, betrayal, water, wind. About the merciless sun and the beauty of a woman's eyes hidden behind a niqab. You don't catch every word, but the tone is unmistakable. Someone translates loosely for you. One poem is about a man who buried a secret in the desert, only to forget where. Another mourns a lost falcon. Another praises a mother who walked for hours to collect kindling while pregnant, because even the fire had to be fed. You wonder why poetry matters so much here, until it clicks. In a place with few distractions, words are everything. They soothe, they seduce, they settle disputes, they immortalize. And as the fire burns low, the faces around it blur slightly in the flicker. There's something timeless in the way they sit, speak, sip. You could be in 1825 or 1525. Only the odd flashlight or plastic bottle betrays the present. You hear the sound of wind shifting again, not threatening, just moving. A reminder that even this beautiful moment is temporary. The fire will die, the stars will wheel above, the night will deepen. And in the stillness, someone leans over and says something quietly. You don't quite catch it, but they smile at your confusion. It means the night is like a mother, they explain. Tough during the day, gentle when she sings you to sleep. And just like that, you get it. The desert isn't just a place. It's a teacher, a trickster, a parent. And Bedouins didn't just survive it, they learned it, internalized it, matched its rhythm. Their strength isn't just in how they ration water or track stars or cool tents. It's in how they preserve meaning. How they protect not just the body but the spirit, the culture, the community. Even in the harshest environment on Earth, they've kept laughter, art, and beauty alive. And that might be the most incredible survival trick of all. You walk back to camp under the clearest sky you've ever seen. No pollution, no artificial glow, just the universe unfiltered. You can see the Milky Way stretching from one edge of your vision to the other, a river of stars, silent and eternal. Back in your tent, the air is finally cool, almost cold. You wrap up, sip one last cup of water, and lie down. Outside, a lullaby in the form of a breeze. You close your eyes, not fighting the sleep anymore. And as you drift off, you wonder what story they'll tell tomorrow, and if, just maybe, you're becoming part of it. Morning again, and it comes fast. But this time, it's different. The light isn't harsh, it's soft, stretched, golden. The kind of light that lingers on your skin instead of stabbing it. The kind that makes you feel like you've woken up inside a painting. There's a calm in the camp. Fewer clinks, fewer shouts. No sudden scrambles to find a lost goat or patch a leaking water skin. Today isn't for traveling. Today is for staying. It's the kind of day the Bedouins call a pause day. Not lazy, never lazy, but slow on purpose. A day to maintain, to mend, to rest your feet and maybe your spirit too. Even the camels seem to know it. They lounge near the tethering post, chewing cud with a patience only they could master. You sit just outside your tent, watching the world inhale slowly. The dunes shift under a barely there breeze, casting new shadows, reshaping themselves. You've come to respect how nothing here stays the same for long, and yet nothing truly changes. A girl not more than 10 passes by, a bundle of firewood balanced perfectly on her head. She gives you a glance, not a smile, not a frown, just a look that says, "This is how we do things." And then she's gone. You spend part of the morning repairing one of the tent flaps. It's a surprisingly meditative task. Thick palm fiber ropes, worn but strong. You weave and knot like the elders showed you. Your hands move without much thought, like they remember something even you don't. Around midday, the heat spikes again, but this time you're ready. Your clothing is loose, layered, breathable. You stay in the shade. You drink just enough. You even start to understand the signs your body gives you, how thirst creeps in sideways, how dizziness is not a warning but a judgment. You sit with an older man under the main awning. He wears a keffiyeh so worn it's nearly translucent. He tells you about the sandstorms of 1965, how the sky went black at noon, how they lost half the herd and still made it out alive. You ask how. He taps his temple once, then his heart, then the sky. Smart mind, strong heart, and trust in the signs. You don't press for more. That feels like enough. You take a walk after lunch just to move. A short loop around the camp's edge. You see the outlines of where other tents used to be, circles of blackened stones, ghost camps. You wonder how many generations lived here before the GPS and solar panels, before plastic water containers, before even the steel frame tents. Historians still argue whether the Bedouin way of life will vanish entirely or simply evolve beyond recognition. Satellite dishes now perch next to camel saddles. WhatsApp messages send coordinates for grazing routes once memorized by heart. One elder jokes that soon the goats will have tracking chips. But it's not all doom scrolling and nostalgia. You watch a young woman teaching her son how to tie a traditional knot used for camel harnesses, right beside her phone playing a YouTube tutorial on bread making. It's a blend of old and new that somehow doesn't feel like a contradiction. Even survival evolves. The day winds down slowly. A long tea ceremony, drawn-out conversation, a few hands of a card game someone's great-grandfather would have called blasphemous, but no one seems offended. The desert has bigger problems than poker. Tonight, dinner is sweet rice with raisins and chunks of lamb. Cooked slowly over a fire, the scent mingles with the spice-scented air. It's simple, perfect filling. You eat with your hands, you talk little, you listen much. Later, you sit once more under the stars. Someone mentions an old Bedouin proverb. The sky is the only roof that has never collapsed. You glance up, the stars seem closer than ever. The air is sharp, clear. You can hear insects, a distant owl, the occasional bleating of sheep, and beneath all that nothing. A silence so full it feels like music. And that's when it hits you. The secret to Bedouin survival was never just the practical stuff. Not just the water tricks, the sand reading, the tent materials. Not even the social structures or the spiritual faith. It was this: stillness, presence, adaptability. The ability to sit in an environment designed to break you, and instead of resisting it, sink with it, flow with it. They didn't fight the desert, they became part of it. And somehow, after all these days, you feel like you've been absorbed too. Not fully, not forever, but enough. Enough to carry something back with you. Enough to change how you see air conditioning, silence, time, hunger, heat. Enough to appreciate water like it's gold and conversation like it's bread. You close your eyes that night without fear, without even a fan. Just the open air and the stars and the memory of stories circling like fireflies around your head. And now here you are, back in your bed, wherever that might be. Maybe in a high-rise apartment with blackout curtains. Maybe in a cottage with a creaky fan spinning overhead. Maybe on a couch, earbuds still in, phone resting on your chest. Wherever you are, take one last slow breath. Let it fill your lungs the way desert air fills a tent at dawn, cool, light, healing. The journey is over, but the rhythm stays. You've walked across dunes that whisper secrets, felt winds older than nations brushing past your face. You've sipped bitter coffee under a moon big enough to swallow you whole. You've watched time unfold like a carpet, inch by inch, with patience no clock could measure. Most of all, you've learned what survival really means. Not conquering, not controlling, but knowing when to bend, when to pause, when to listen. And that maybe, just maybe, the hardest landscapes produce the deepest wisdom. So now let go of the day. Let the fan hum like a distant breeze. Let your blanket feel like a Bedouin robe, and let your thoughts settle, one grain at a time, like sand finding its place in a quiet dune. The stars are still out there, the stories too. And when you wake tomorrow, something in you will be just a little tougher, a little calmer, a little more desert-wise. Good night, traveler. Sweet dreams.